Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today we are looking at a massive stack of sources.
Yeah, we've got case studies, internal roadmaps, some really highly detailed strategy playbooks. I'm your expert for today, and I'm really excited to get into this one.
Same here. And the mission today is to outline this huge systemic problem in the world of enterprise technology. But more importantly, we're looking at the solution. Let's just jump right into it. Imagine this scenario. You're sitting in the executive boardroom, right? And your organization has just spent the last 3 years,
Oh, at least 3 years.
right, and tens of millions of dollars upgrading to a massive new enterprise system, like, say, SAP S/4 and ANA.
Yep, the big one.
Exactly. You've sat through all the steering committee meetings. You've seen the shiny PowerPoint decks promising, unprecedented efficiency. And finally, the big day arrives. It's go live, you flip the switch, and almost immediately the entire thing completely derails.
It is the ultimate corporate nightmare, truly. And it happens far more often than anyone in the industry likes to publicly admit. I mean, these are incredibly complex global implementations. So when they go off the rails, they don't just glitch, they threaten the fundamental survival of the business itself.
Right, because the schedules are blown, budgets are totally busted, your order-to-cash process is frozen, meaning you literally cannot take your customers' money.
Which is the one thing you really need to be able to do.
Exactly. Operations are grinding to a halt. Instead of popping champagne, everyone is in a sheer state of panic. Which is exactly why our mission today is to explore a very specific battle-tested playbook used by a firm called Dimension 11 LLC.
Yeah, they do some fascinating work.
They really do. They provide these incredible services where they essentially act as like the elite rescue squad for these exact disasters. So we're going to unpack their triage to transformation playbook to understand exactly how they stabilize SAP programs that are in absolute freefall, stop the financial bleeding, and ultimately help organizations recoup those massive investments.
And the core dynamic we'll be exploring today is the tension they navigate between two drastically different mindsets. You have short-term stabilization on one hand versus long-term transformation on the other.
Two very different beasts.
Totally. You really can't have one without the other, but they require entirely different tools, different timelines, and honestly, different organizational approaches entirely.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we get into how Dimension 11 fixes the problem, we need to understand why these massive, well-funded projects crash right at the finish line in the first place. I mean, is it like buying a state-of-the-art mansion but forgetting to check if the plumbing actually connects to the city water line?
That's a brilliant way to look at it. What's fascinating here is that the failures usually aren't about the SAP software itself.
Wait, really? It's not a software defect?
No, and that's a huge misconception. The software, fundamentally, it works. The failure is almost always about organizational readiness, master data quality, and above all, testing.
Testing. I mean, I'm struggling with this a bit. You're telling me a Fortune 500 company drops $30 or $40 million on an SAP migration, and their plan for testing is just so inadequate that it brings down the whole company.
Sounds crazy, right?
And it's like negligence, not a technical glitch. How do you mess up testing with that kind of budget?
Well, it's what the industry calls the happy path trap.
The happy path.
Yeah. During user acceptance testing, companies tend to test the system under ideal, highly controlled conditions. They simulate, a perfect order placed by a perfect customer with absolutely perfect, clean inventory data.
But the real world is never perfect.
Exactly. If you're working in operations, real-world transactions are incredibly messy. So they completely neglect to simulate real-world data volumes. It's like trying to run a high-pressure fire hose through a standard garden hose. The infrastructure physically cannot handle the sheer volume of unstructured, incomplete data that hits it on day one.
Wow.
Yeah, in S/4HANA public cloud deployments, for example, poor quality and high-volume data are the primary culprits for those immediate go-live explosions.
So they turn on the fire hose, the system chokes on the dirty data, and the whole thing goes down. But surely they have automated testing to catch this stuff at scale beforehand.
They try. But testing itself becomes this massive financial black hole. According to the playbooks we're looking at, manual regression testing ends up eating over 30% of the entire project budget before the system even goes live.
30%? That's wild.
Right. And if they try to automate it to save time, those automation scripts are often incredibly brittle. They constantly break just because of minor dynamic changes to the SAP Fiori user interface.
Oh, because the UI is constantly updating.
Yeah, the object locators in the scripts literally can't handle the dynamic elements of the new UI. So the automation fails, and you're right back to expensive, slow manual testing.
Okay, so if brittle testing scripts are burning a third of the budget before they even launch, what happens when they hit the ultimate stress test? Like migrating decades of legacy code to a brand new system? Because, we're seeing a massive wave of companies currently migrating from legacy ECC systems to S/4HANA.
Oh, that migration is what we call the upgrade crisis.
Sounds ominous.
It is. When you move to S/4HANA, the fundamental database architecture changes entirely. For years, organizations have been writing custom code, often millions of lines of it, to make SAP do exactly what they want. But in an S/4HANA upgrade, that custom code suddenly becomes obsolete. Legacy integrations just break.
You just stop working altogether.
Yep. And if you have parallel development happening, meaning your business is still making necessary daily changes in the live production system, while the IT team is simultaneously building the new upgrade, merging those changes together, which is a process called retrofitting, becomes an absolute nightmare.
And then the cruelest irony of all this, post go live. When you actually need the specialist the most to untangle all these broken integrations, they roll off the project.
Precisely. The implementation partners finish their contracted scope, they shake hands, and they move on to their next gig.
Leaving the internal team holding the bag.
Exactly. An internal team that's already overwhelmed, exhausted, and probably pretty poorly trained on the new system mechanics. And now they have to deal with untracked changes, complex authorization bugs, and failing master data.
All right, so the fire hose has burst the garden hose, the contractors have driven off in their trucks, and the business stakeholders are basically standing in 3 feet of operational water. How does Dimension 11 actually stop the bleeding? This brings us to the first phase of their playbook, which is stabilization. How do they take rapid control of this situation without just, causing more panic in an already exhausted IT department?
So they execute what they call a rapid return to control playbook. The very first step is shifting the executive mindset to acknowledge that go live is not the end of the project. It is merely the beginning.
A tough pill to swallow for executives.
Very. But they mandate an intense short-term period called hypercare.
Hypercare. Honestly, that sounds grueling.
It is grueling, but it's totally essential. We're talking about a minimum of 90 days post-go live where Dimension 11 establishes dedicated war rooms. They implement rigorous weekly reviews. The goal of stabilization isn't to build new features or optimize workflows. It's short-term recovery and sheer continuity.
You just have to keep the lights on.
Yeah, you have to move the IT culture from frantically fixing symptoms to systematically restoring a baseline equilibrium.
But on a technical level, what are they actually doing in that war room? Because a lot of times you hear stabilization, and it just means a bunch of expensive consultants running around putting Band-Aids on critical errors.
It is much more clinical than that with Dimension 11. They implement hard technical triage, they establish continuous basis monitoring, and for those less familiar, basis is essentially the operating system level of SAP.
Okay, got it.
They aren't just looking at whether a transaction failed. They are actively monitoring memory heaps, background job failures, work process bottlenecks. They pair this with proactive performance analysis.
So they aren't waiting for the system to crash.
No, not at all. They're doing targeted capacity and workload tuning to eliminate what they call system noise.
There was a really specific intervention in the sources that I found fascinating. They use preemptive SQL analyzer monitoring in the quality assurance environment to catch performance bottlenecks before they ever hit production.
Yes. And the mechanism there is crucial. By analyzing the actual SQL queries, which is the way the SAP application layer asks the underlying HNADA database for information, they can isolate the specific inefficient requests that are hogging all the server resources.
That's smart.
Yeah, they rewrite or optimize those queries in QA, which stops the bottleneck from ever migrating to the live environment. And then they pair that highly technical triage with weekly EWA or early watch alert analysis.
And here is where Dimension 11's approach gets incredibly modern. SAP generates these early watch alerts automatically, right? But they are hundreds of pages of dense technical system logs.
Completely unreadable for a normal person.
Right. But Dimension 11 is taking those EWA logs and distilling them using Google Notebook LM. They use AI to summarize massive data dumps into actionable executive insights. I mean, it's a brilliant way to cut through the noise and give leadership exactly what they need to know without drowning them in basis administration jargon.
It really is, and that really reflects their broader philosophy. You cannot align the business to fix a crisis if you cannot clearly communicate the mechanics of the crisis to non-technical stakeholders.
I want to explicitly reference this analogy from their playbooks
Yeah.
because it perfectly captures this phase.
Mm-hmm.
They say stabilization is like a caterpillar, pausing to regain its footing on a leaf.
Mm-hmm.
It's essential. It ensures survival. It restores the previous baseline of performance so the organization can breathe again. But a paused caterpillar is still just a caterpillar. It doesn't evolve the business.
Which brings us right back to that core tension we talked about. Stabilization is a temporary restoration. But the enterprise didn't spend tens of millions of dollars just to survive and do things exactly the way they did them in the old system.
Right.
They spent that money to evolve.
Exactly. The organization paid for a butterfly. So once the system is stable, once the caterpillar is safe and the bleeding has stopped, how does Dimension 11 shift the strategy to actually deliver that promised ROI?
This is where we enter the transformation phase. And the shift is profound. If stabilization is about fixing symptoms and halting the damage, transformation is about addressing root causes. It's about building entirely new organizational capabilities. It's a strategic evolution of the company.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Dimension 11 uses mathematical symbolism to represent this shift, and I just love this detail. They use the lowercase delta, the Greek letter, to represent the stabilization phase. Because in math, a lowercase delta represents a small, incremental change.
Right.
These are the day-to-day triage improvements, the SQL query tuning, the daily bug fixes that accumulate over time.
The necessary table stakes just to keep the lights on.
Right. But then, for the transformation phase, they introduce the uppercase delta, the big triangle, and that represents the visible substantial leap, the massive shift in progress that redefines what the organization can actually do. The delta team.
It's a very powerful visualization. The uppercase delta is the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. It is a fundamental change from within. But importantly, they map this out on a very specific, realistic timeline.
Yeah, you can't rush it.
No, you absolutely cannot execute an uppercase delta transformation overnight while the business is still recovering from go-live trauma.
So let's look at those roadmap timelines. From Q1 of fiscal year 26 through Q4, their focus is heavily on architectural relief. They talk about standing up high availability or HA environments and sidecar capacity specifically for batch loads.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of why that sidecar capacity is such a huge game changer. If you've ever tried to reconcile a month-end close and your screen just completely freezes.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right, you felt the pain of what happens when batch loads and user transactions fight for the exact same server space. In SAP, you have users doing daily transactional work, entering orders, running localized reports, whatever. But you also have massive automated batch jobs that process millions of rows of data in the background. If you run both of those in the exact same environment, they lock each other out. The system slows to an absolute crawl.
It just chokes.
Exactly. So by building a dedicated sidecar environment exclusively for those heavy batch workloads, Dimension 11 immediately relieves the pressure on the main system.
It's like adding a dedicated freight lane to a highly congested highway. Suddenly the commuter traffic, like the daily users, can actually move at lightning speed while the heavy cargo just hums along on its own separate infrastructure.
That's a perfect way to visualize it. And once that architectural breathing room is established, they move into the true modernization phase. Looking at Q4 of fiscal year 26 through fiscal year 27, this is where they execute their AI roadmap and broad Fiori adoption.
But adopting Fiori isn't just about giving people prettier screens, right? I mean, it goes deeper than that.
Much deeper, and that's a trap a lot of companies fall into. Fiori replaces those old, complex SAP GUI screens with intuitive, role-based web apps. But if you just turn it on, users will reject it because it fundamentally changes their daily workflow.
Change is hard.
It really is. Dimension 11's transformation playbook focuses heavily on adoption strategy and education. They are moving the company toward a sustainable operating model, empowering teams to actually leverage AI and modern interfaces to actively reduce that crisis-driven manual work.
Okay, I have to push back a little here.
Sure.
Because transformation and sustainable operating models are fantastic concepts, sure. But if you're the VP of Finance listening to this, you want to know how this actually works in the trenches. You're thinking about doing major surgery on live, highly regulated financial processes. How do you do that without breaking the system all over again?
You do it by targeting the areas of highest risk and highest value first, with surgical precision. And in SAP, if we connect this to the bigger picture, there are a few areas more critical and honestly more complex than RR: revenue accounting and reporting.
Oh man, just saying the acronym RAR strikes fear into the hearts of accountants everywhere.
With very good reason. This is the module that dictates how and when a company complies with accounting standards like IFRS 15 or ASC 606. It literally determines when you can legally recognize your revenue.
So if RR is broken,
If R is broken, your financial statements are compromised and you are facing serious audit risks. So Dimension 11 approaches R remediation by first reducing the existing backlog of errors down to manageable levels.
right, they stop the immediate bleeding. But then they actually change the pipeline. The sources mention standardizing Burmum parent material groups. How does that actually fix the problem?
Okay, think about a complex bundled order, say a hardware device sold with a 3-year software subscription and a service contract.
Okay, fairly standard for tech.
Right. That's a bill of materials, or BANA. In a broken system, the parent material group isn't standardized, so SAP doesn't know how to allocate the revenue across the hardware, the software, and the service component.
So it just airs out.
Exactly. It triggers an error and drops into a manual review queue, totally clogging the pipeline. By standardizing the BOM parent material groups, Dimension 11 ensures the system instantly recognizes those revenue dependencies automatically.
They also enforce validation rules for mandatory fields, specifically something called the standalone selling price, or ZSSP.
Yes. If the ZSSP is blank or incorrect when an order is entered, the R-Air module cannot calculate the correct revenue allocation. It just breaks the compliance chain. So instead of letting bad data into the system and trying to clean it up later, which, by the way, is how you get those massive backlogs in the first place, Dimension 11 implements what they call SAP guardrails.
Which literally reject the bad data at the door. Like if a sales rep tries to enter an order without a valid ZSSP or the correct start and end dates, the guardrail stops the transaction from even saving.
Exactly. You can't even enter it. And for modern businesses with heavy digital sales, they extend this to e-commerce by enhancing the Zara fulfillment program. This custom enhancement automates the clearing of deferred, unscheduled revenue the exact moment the e-commerce platform signals that an item has shipped.
It's fascinating because it's not just fixing lines of code. It's fundamentally redesigning the process so that the business stakeholders don't have to constantly audit the machine. They can actually trust the system again.
And rebuilding that trust is the absolute essence of true transformation. We see this exact same rigorous, localized approach applied globally as well. Just look at their roadmap for the Latin America or LATAM rollout.
Yes, the conversion to SAP 25XX scheduled for Q1 through Q3 of fiscal year 27. I know from other deep dives we've done that rolling out ERPs in Latin America is notoriously difficult.
Oh, it is arguably one of the most complex regions in the entire world for an SAP rollout. You're dealing with hyperinflationary economies, extreme localized tax regulations, and strict government e-invoicing laws, like the Nota Fiscal in Brazil or similar mandates in Mexico.
So a standard global template just won't cut it.
Not at all. Dimension 11 knows that a generic global lift and shift simply will not work there.
So what's their playbook for LATAM then?
They conduct a deep upgrade analysis specifically tailored to the region. Obviously, they ensure full Spanish and Portuguese language support, but more importantly, they tackle the heavy, localized requirements in sales compensation, really complex treasury operations, and royalties management.
The playbooks mention they use tools like Vistex for those royalties.
Yes, Vistex. It's an SAP add-on designed specifically to handle complex pricing, rebates, and royalties, things that standard SAP really struggles with out of the box. By leveraging Vistex, they can automate the incredibly convoluted local sales incentive structures required in LATAM without heavily customizing the core SAP code.
So they're basically acting as the translator between the rigid global corporate standard and the highly specific, dynamic, local reality. And by successfully navigating the LATAM conversion, they use that region as a template. It becomes an educational proof of concept for the rest of the global organization to understand how to adopt the SAP 25XX upgrade and the new AI and Fiori capabilities.
It all builds on itself. The triage fixes the immediate pain. The stabilization gives the IT department room to breathe and think strategically. And the transformation turns this massive, terrifying software implementation into an actual, measurable competitive advantage.
To sum this all up, the The core value proposition of Dimension 11 LLC isn't just that they are a group of smart IT fixers who can debug code.
Uh-huh.
It's that they take SAP, which for many of these enterprises has become a massive source of operational risk, financial drain, and sheer anxiety, and they leverage these incredible services to turn it back into the reliable backbone it was always supposed to be. They don't just patch the system and leave the organization to send for itself. They leave behind a sustainable operating model, measurable KPIs, and deeply empowered internal teams.
And that empowerment is the ultimate deliverable. This entire triage to transformation journey results in a profound cultural change within the enterprise. It moves a company away from a toxic culture of panic and constant firefighting, and it reinforces a new culture of continuous learning and adaptive leadership.
So the end goal is independence.
Yes, the ultimate goal is that Dimension 11's crisis-driven interventions are eventually no longer needed because the organization has evolved the capability to manage its own growth.
Reading through these playbooks really makes you think about the underlying fragility of so many corporate systems we interact with every day. We build these massive digital mansions, but we rarely test the plumbing for a flood until the water is already rising.
Well said.
So here's a thought for you to take with you and mull over today. If standard, best-case scenario happy path testing and ignoring massive technical debt are the primary reasons these multi-million-dollar SAP projects derail, what other critical foundational systems in your own organization are currently operating under that exact same false sense of security, just waiting for a stressful go-live moment to crack?